This is our amp board. It's very similar to the shape of what is in the car. We actually use the shape of the car to generate this. This would be where that factory subwoofer goes, and this is that amplifier mount. As we said, we need to keep these things low and over so that that bracket that's on the seat does not get in the way of our amplifiers. Today's show is brought to you by AudioControl, making good sound great. With a full line of integration devices, signal processors, and amplifiers, they have something for every install. All their amplifiers come with their popular high-level to low-level section, from the basic amp to the most advanced. Their D-series amplifiers also come with their DSP processors built into them, making your installation even easier. So make sure to head over to audiocontrol.com, and we'd like to thank them for being a sponsor of the show. The first step is figuring out where we're going to mount these amplifiers. I've already gone into the car and measured how far over I need to come in order to clear that box. This is super thin, so this can go here, no issues. It's not going to hit that. But these have to go this way some. I also have two distribution blocks that are going to have to go here for my zero gauge that I'm running, and I have these two passive crossovers for the Morel speakers we're putting in. My plan so far is to mount these somewhere like this. There's two wires I have to run up front as far as speaker goes. I have two tweeter wires, so there's not a lot going on there, and they're going to go up the passenger side of the car. I have a bass knob, which is going to come up the driver's side of the car, and I have the two zero gauge. That's it. So I don't need a bunch of room across the bottom of the amplifier here for the RCAs and speaker wire. And if I was doing the non-premium sound, I'd be able to move these over more so that I could arrange these better to have that room. With that all in mind, this is my initial thought process as far as where I think these need to go. I need them up high enough to where I can get all the stuff happening here. I need them down low enough so that the seat will still close, and I need them over far enough for that same reason. This is my best guess. I'm going to clear this stuff off, get it into the car, test the seat to make sure it opens and closes without rubbing on the amplifiers. When you're putting screws into ABS, make sure you pre-drill all the holes that you're going to do. Don't just try to screw into it. With the seat in the up position, put a flashlight back there, and we're just looking at this gap here. Looking at the space there with that green plug where the amplifier sits. Make sure that you do fold the whole seat down and that you don't have any issues there. And fold it back up. Make sure you hear no clanks. Put your hand behind there. Make sure that it is not touching. This part of the seat right here is where the concern is because it is a metal. There's a bar here. This is a great position for it. It's not touching anywhere. We'll proceed to the next step, which is getting the amplifiers all wired up and ready for sound. This is going to be our layout. It fits. Everything is where we need it. First part of this install I want to concentrate on is the Zen. One thing that I've done off camera is flip the circuit board inside of the unit. If you'll notice, it says Zen here and the image is right. Typically it's wrong. In the past I've cut covers for it and whatnot, and then someone pointed out you can easily slide the board in and out. I was like, that's a good idea. And since we weren't too into the install, it was easy enough to pull the 4 screws out of each end, flip it around. It just means that these techs don't pertain to the ends now. But if you're one of the guys that wants it to where it's the right orientation, something you might think about. The reason for that is that the blue USB has to plug in down here on the bottom because the cable isn't long enough to come up here and plug into the top. There's also no reason to put a bunch of zip ties on here and like put it in after the fact. You need to be able to unplug this and take it out if necessary. With that in mind, I'm going to drill a hole here so that it can come in from behind, loop through, and plug in and not just be this blue wire hanging out. Make sure you make the hole big enough, test fit it if you need to. You don't want to get it into the car and then realize that you made it just a little too small. Grabbing our speaker and power harness, plug that in. The remote turn on wire is going to run across just like this. These have plenty to plug in. The speaker wire is also going to do the same thing across just this area here, and then this will run off into the corner. The RCAs plug into the top. For those, I'm going to drill a hole and do the same thing. We just have to wait and see how long the cables are. Let's just get started assembling this thing together and running our wires. done. Power is run across the bottom here. Ground is right above that. Our speaker wires coming from the factory plug are located right here. They come across in tight next to the amplifier and head over into the crossovers. These are the two tweeter wires that are going to run forward for us. The RCAs tuck up into the amplifier and then go up into the Zen. Our USB will come up through this hole here and plug in. This hole here is for our bass knob. And that's about it as far as this goes. This now can go into the car. Once in the car, plug in all our harnesses, and then we'll come in and we'll look at everything and how it plays out. Amp board is mounted using the two factory screws provided here and here. Zen is connected. All the connections are done behind this panel. Make sure when you go to put it back in, you put that connector in right, just like we showed you. Put it in the reverse direction. You don't want it to not go in right. The one thing with flipping it upside down is that those lights that we were seeing earlier are on the bottom. If you do need to see it though, nice little mirror on the bottom there will allow you to see what's going on. We've already tested it though, so we really shouldn't have anything to worry about. Make the rest of the connections you need to make in the car, such as the tweeters, power and ground. Always save those for last. Then we can turn it on and take a listen to it. With everything in, turn the car on, turn your volume up 1. Check and see if you have audio. We have audio. Turn it back down. If you're doing any form of DSP processor or anything like that, at this point you know you have audio, turn it back down, plug it into the laptop, do any software updates, anything like that, because what we want to do is get the crossovers set up first. DSP is plugged in, laptop, password, firmware available, yes. Here's one of the secrets to doing the firmware. Start the car. If you've never done it before and don't know how long it's gonna take, if you have a car that takes a key and you know if the car stays on for a certain amount of time, it automatically shuts off. The same true for a push button. Start the car, let it run. If your amplifier shuts off while it's doing a software update, it can lock up the whole amplifier. Might not necessarily hose it, but you may have to, just like a computer, might have to call tech support and see if there is any form of on-site reload of the software. Fortunately for your audio control, you can. Ask me how I know. The other thing you can do too is you can take a jumper from the constant 12 volts over to the remote turn on, and that will make sure that that amplifier stays on as long as there's 12 volts going into it. You can also do it while it's sitting on the bench if you have an external power supply. Just be careful when you're doing it. Make sure that the car doesn't go to sleep. When it's all done, it will reboot. Every DSP is gonna have an input setup, front, rear, front high is what the D4800 has. This right here is our volume control. It comes default to 12. We're gonna just set it to 0 for right now. Move to rear, we'll do the same thing. It comes default to 12 because of the testing they do from the factory. Front high. When we were talking about this earlier, this is that input for those tweeters if we needed to use the high level input. This is the control we'd use to do our summing right here. When we look at the output view, front, we'll enable front, we have our choices for summing. If we pick this, now both the front and the front high are going into channels 1 and 2. If while listening to it we decide that either the front needs to go up because we have room to turn up the gain, or the high needs to go down because it is getting to be too intense, we come back to our input views, we can select high and we can volume down some or volume up some. If we wanted to, of course, we could bring them both up if there's room before distortion. This is extremely helpful if you're doing a system that doesn't have some form of integration available for it and you have inputs that you need to sum together. Now keep in mind, even though this says highs, it can be used for anything. For example, let's say there's a front mid-bass, mid-range in the door and then a front subwoofer. You could do the same thing. You can also sum those into channels 3 and 4. Let's say there was a subwoofer that was attached to and you wanted the rear speaker to have more bass. You could turn that on and that would sum that into the rear as well. Line out, it could just be your subwoofer input. For this, we're not using it. I like to label it not used and then label all of my outputs. And then I label preset 1 as the vehicle. In this case, we're working with a white F-150. Click over to output view. Channel 1 and 2, we're gonna feed off of inputs front. We'll set our crossover point. Outputs rear, we will be feeding off of the rear outputs, setting the crossover point for those. And then line output, we're gonna feed off of front, and we'll set our crossovers for those. At this point, you could also set up your time delay if you already know the numbers. If you don't, that's okay. We can add those in at a later time. We just wanted to get the crossovers and the basic setup done on the amplifier. We need to do some other testing, such as polarity, balance fader, and things like that to make sure that everything is going into the right spot coming out of the Zen. One of the topics we talk about a lot on this show is polarity, the movement of the speaker. A couple questions that have come up is it that important? You know, just weird stuff. Sound is AC, does it matter? Yeah, it totally matters. You have to know the direction of the speaker. If you get that wrong, one side or the other, then they're out of phase. That causes phasing issues, which means you get cancellation. To test this at home, if you'd like to see how this actually works, take two subwoofers. Wire one the opposite of the other. So positive, positive, negative, negative, and then go negative to positive, positive to negative. Now you've wired them up backwards. What's going to happen is you'll have no bass. The same thing is true for any other driver. Where it kind of doesn't matter is whether they're all in positive polarity or all in negative polarity. Typically in the F-150, they're all going to be in negative polarity, and that has to do a lot with noise canceling and Bluetooth, meaning talking to the microphone. Sometimes if they're in polarity with the microphone, you get echo. When they're out of polarity with the microphone, you don't get echo. In this case, they should all pop red. If one pops green, then we know we have it wrong. To test this, we're using the Mobile Solutions PT98 Plus. All our speakers are moving in the right direction. In some cases, you will want these tweeters wired in the opposite direction of the mid bass. It just has to do with what type of crossovers and how they were built, the type of speaker they're using. A lot of manufacturers do actually wire their tweeters out of polarity with this to compensate for the design of their crossovers so that you don't have any dips in them. Don't assume that they're wrong. Take a closer look at the speaker and the crossover before you go and flip them. What you're looking for is if this tweeter were to pop green and that one was to pop red, that's not right. You don't want that because that's going to cause that cancellation. Now we have to do our balance and fader and make sure that all four speakers play in the holes they're supposed to. If you get this wrong, when you go to EQ it or time alignment, then you're going to run into problems, because if you think you're time aligning for the driver's door and you're actually adjusting the passenger door, things could get weird really quick. The driver's rear, passenger front, driver's front. And while you're here, if you haven't done so already, make sure all of these are set to 0. You don't want these on anything because you're gonna be doing your own equalization. That's not to say you can't use them. You can, just use them sparingly. Once everything is tuned, that's the salt and pepper that is going to allow you to make certain songs better or worse. Hopefully just better. Not all music is recorded the same. Not all music has the same intensity. Sometimes you need a boost here and there in order to make something sound better. Don't be afraid to use it. However, if you find yourself turning it up a lot, well, then it's tuned wrong, or you just don't have something set up properly. What we need to do now is actually some of the more intense stuff with the car. We need to make sure all the other things work. Backup sensors, CarPlay microphones, and things like that, because those are also connected through that Zen. If those don't work, well, we could have some issues. What's the weather like today?
It's currently partly cloudy and 91 degrees.
Now when testing CarPlay, adjust the volume for CarPlay while she's talking, then that'll just adjust CarPlay's volume. When she stops talking, the volume will revert back to what it was before. So the first chime you want to check, just the standard chime. The other one is the backup sensors. Put in reverse. Fernando, could you walk behind the truck for me? If those aren't loud enough, it's a simple enough task to turn them up, in which case we wanted to turn ours up here. Grab your Windows or Mac, it really doesn't matter. And the instructions on page 7, it's gonna tell you to launch your browser. For Windows, you type in ZEN. For Mac, you're gonna type in zen.local. Over here in this top corner, you have chime level, you have alert gain. Turn those two up, and that's it. You'll have adjusted the volume. If you like them quiet, well then just leave them both down. I like them a little bit louder than they were. To me, they were just a smidge too quiet. The other thing too is you'll notice that they stayed in their right speaker. If it's the rear speaker chimes. If it's the front speaker will chime. Door chime comes out of the front driver's door. Where this will be different is if you decide to use the Toshlink output. 2-channel audio only. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna sum all your warnings and chimes to left and right. You will no longer have front and rear. Each manufacturer is a little bit different when it comes to integrating into a factory factory system. This one obviously focused on the Zen. It's our preferred method right now for integrating into these F-150s with the BO system. Remember, whatever project you're working on, check those websites we showed you, find out what's available for your car, and then make sure you do all the testing so that your outcome is as pleasing as our outcome is. And with that, Fernando.
On to the next one, guys.
We hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a great night as always. We'll see you later next time.
Bye.
Bye.